Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyersportsbetting.com. Look us up in the sports section on Roku or even on that Roku app, Dwyer Boxing and Sports News. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. There is a great video online right now that ranks among the very best of pre-fight videos that I have seen. The name of the video, and I've put a link to it in my favorites on my channel page, but if you can't access the video from that page, the name of the video is Carl Froch versus George Groves 2013-Heated Words. Right? Again, it's Carl Froch versus George Groves 2013-Heated Words. What makes the video really good is the fact that the interviewer is former champion Johnny Nelson, who is an excellent interviewer and who has the common sense to sense the chemistry and to get out of the way of the fighters. It's really good stuff. And of course, in the interview, Carl Froch is on his game, hurling the insults, claiming he's been disrespected. George Groves is on his game, calmly listening to Froch's tirade, but making no apologies for his firm conviction that he's going to win this fight. Right? The fighters literally throw all their cards on the table. Carl Froch at one point in the interview talks about how he knocked out George Groves in sparring. Groves, who in my opinion actually has the upper hand in the interview, actually says that Carl Froch is confusing a lack of fear with disrespect. I think this is a great fight. As I've said here online, had Adam Booth still been in George Groves' corner, I would have taken Groves in this fight. As it is, I'm on the sidelines and I'm going to enjoy this one. Understand though, I'm going to disagree here with two of British boxing's biggest names, Carl Froch and James DeGale, right? Two of the biggest fighters in the UK right now at 168, right? The other being George Groves. Both of these guys are talking as if this is not a real match. I'm here to tell you this is definitely a real match. George Groves is very talented. Understand, he didn't beat DeGale once officially. He's beaten him twice officially. At a minimum, we know that George Groves has the talent to go the distance with James DeGale. Also, there is an open question in this fight about who the puncher is. Because as hard as Carl Froch hits, and he hits awfully hard, folks, understand that George Groves himself is a puncher. Right? I'd like to see Groves move and use his legs in the fight. But understand that George Groves, when he plants his feet, has knockout power in both hands. Also understand, too, that Groves, quite frankly, is faster, both foot speed-wise and hand speed-wise, than Carl Froch. Carl Froch, of course, is older and is very cagey, and of course has held his own against the best out there. We can talk about Carl Froch against Mikhail Kessler, the first fight. I'm just here to tell you that first fight was razor close, much closer than the scoring of the fight suggested. Keep in mind that first fight was in Kessler's backyard. Right? We can talk about Froch against Andre Ward. Just understand, Carl Froch went the distance against Andre Ward and did have some moments later in that fight. In other words, the fight was competitive. Froch was not blown out, right? So Carl Froch has been in the ring with advanced fighters. And now, of course, he's fighting a countryman who firmly believes, that he's the best in the weight class in his country, if not the world. Now let's talk about The knockdown in sparring, what Froch claims was a knockout, on a punch he pulled using 16-ounce gloves. Understand, sparring is not fighting, right? George Groves may have been in the ring with Carl Froch trying specific things, right? Giving up assets that he knows he has and can use in a real fight, such as movement, to see if he could, let's say, land a right hand in certain circumstances. He may have been trying out a defense that now he knows doesn't work, right? Because he got knocked out, and going into this fight, he'll know, okay, I'm not going to go there. That's not a viable strategy. The fact that a fighter gets roughed up in sparring doesn't mean as much as it suggests. When I look at tapes of sparring, what I'm really looking for is to see the hand speed. I saw a tape a while back of Vanis Martirosyan against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., and I was struck by how Martirosyan's hand speed was faster than Chavez Jr.'s, right? You also want to see the size of the guys and how they use that size, right? Because that's something that translates into fights. But you really can't assume that the strategy a fighter is using in practice is what he's going to use on fight night. Because the purpose of sparring is to try out Plan C's, Plan D's, Plan E's. It's to get out of your comfort zone and try to lift your game by actually trying different things. Now, the one thing we know, and I believe we know this clearly, is that George Groves had many other options rather than this fight, right? He could have fought several other people at 168 pounds. He's chosen to fight Carl Froch. He's been in the ring with Carl. He's seen Carl's angles and things like that, and he's firmly convinced that he can beat Carl Froch. Let me also make the argument that the knockdown might actually hurt Froch, because Groves may have been in there clowning around, trying things that aren't part of his core arsenal, may have been hit with a haymaker from Froch, right? May have been knocked out in sparring, and now Froch might be of the mindset that that's all he has to do to win the fight. That there'll be an opportunity to land a haymaker, and that all he has to do is patiently wait for that opportunity to arise on fight night. That might not be the case, right? Groves may well have been flat-footed in sparring. On fight night, he might be up on his toes. He might show a different dimension. Dare I say, some might even speculate that Groves may have deliberately tanked his sparring with Carl Froch, knowing that it might give him a greater chance of getting in the ring in a real fight against Carl Froch. Right now, where I'm hesitant on the fight is the fact that, one, Carl Froch has beaten fighters who are faster than him and have a foot speed advantage on him. Lucien Boutte, I thought he was going to lose that fight. I'm still wiping the egg off my face. Carl Froch looked magnificent. But, let me say this, if you look at the tape of that fight, Boutte was a bit reckless with the spacing, right? Where's the one place in the ring you don't want to be if you're fighting Carl Froch? I would say it's up on the ropes. What's Boutte doing lounging around the ropes in that fight? Boutte should have kept that fight in the middle of the ring. I'm assuming that as part of his preparation for fighting Carl Froch, George Groves has studied that tape and is conversant in it frontwards and backwards, right? I'm sure George Groves is not going to make the mistakes that Lucien Boutte made. The other thing that gives me pause is the fact that Groves is in his 20s, And Groves has been lured out of his game plan in some fights, notably the Sierra fight, which was a bit stunning. He could have won that fight easily just moving around the ring. But George Groves always believes that he has the bigger gun in the fight. He has knockout power. And of course there, he started slugging it out with a slugger. As it turned out, he got the knockout. But just understand, had Sierra landed flush, who knows what would have happened in that fight, right? I believe that Groves is exactly the kind of young fighter, the guy who gets caught up in a moment, who benefits from having a great corner. And he had a great corner in Adam Booth. Now I understand Booth's replacement here is someone who has worked with Groves, right? Maybe it works out. But all I'm saying is, in a fight of these stakes, in which Groves, according to the casinos, is a sizable underdog, it would have been much more comforting to this gambler to see Adam Booth in George Groves' corner, right? I believe it's a little bit different if a fighter in his 30s, let's say Miguel Cotto or Floyd Mayweather, and going from Floyd Sr. to Roger Mayweather back to Floyd Sr., changes trainers, right? Those guys have been in the game an awfully long time. But here you have a situation where you have a guy in his mid-20s. This would be like Ray Leonard tossing Angelo Dundee out of his corner early in his career, right before a big fight. It's not comforting, especially given the personal dynamics between the two guys headed into the fight, and the fact that Froch is a charismatic guy who, of course, talks to you during the fight. Could throw Groves off his game. So to sum up, let me just say this. Don't believe what you've read. Right? Groves getting knocked out in sparring. James DeGale, of all people, claiming that Groves is going to lose this fight. Carl Froch claiming Groves is not ready. For the boxing hardcore, let me just ask a simple question. Who moves better in the ring? James DeGale or Carl Froch? Right? Understand, if you believe DeGale moves better, or that the two guys are roughly even, understand that George Groves went the distance with James DeGale. Right? George Groves is real competition. George Groves won the decision over James DeGale. What is Carl Froch going to bring that James DeGale didn't bring in their fight? Right? In my opinion, Groves has a very good chance of winning this fight if he fights the right fight. If he comes in, he's moving around the ring, he's pumping a jab, he's forcing Carl Froch to move just like he did James DeGale, I don't see why George Groves is not going to have some success. He's a world-class fighter. He's not afraid of Carl Froch. All I'm saying, too, is if anyone knows Carl Froch's power, it would be a guy who's been knocked out by Carl Froch in sparring. I think George Groves is a live underdog here. I would take him outright. If he had Adam Booth in his corner, he doesn't. So I'm going to be watching this fight from across the street. But just don't be surprised on fight night if you find out the younger fighter hits as hard as the older fighter. And also don't be surprised on fight night if George Groves comes out, starts fast, and after 4 rounds is up 4 rounds to none. Then it gets interesting. Let me hear from you. Thanks for stopping by.